welcome back to my life. As you can probably already tell by the title of this video, I'm going to be sharing my top 10 movies of 2021. I feel like every year this list just gets better and better because my movie tastes get better, but maybe that's just me. I would like to explain that not all of these movies were produced and premiered in 2021, but they were new movies to me. So, with that being said, let's get on with the video. Also, I would just like to note that I have a notepad in my hand to keep all of my thoughts straight, so I'm not blabbering about things that don't matter. Now we can get on with the video. Coming in at number 10, we have The Social Network. It was one of the very first movies that I saw this year, and I don't really know what made me watch it, but I can probably guess that it was the cast. The cast includes Jesse Eisenberg, Andrew Garfield, Justin Timberlake, and Armie Hammer. Pretty great cast. All of them are very talented actors, although Justin Timberlake really isn't an actor, but oh well. I originally had this movie at number 7, but after doing more research and more thinking about what I was going to say, I realized I didn't love it as much. I mean, I remember like the basic tenets of the story. This movie, if you don't know, is based on the origin story of the creator of the probably the most famous social media platform, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. And Zuckerberg is played by Jesse Eisenberg, who I think does a really good job at this role. And I think he added the sense of humor that this movie really needed to keep going, honestly. While I don't agree with a lot of the morals that Zuckerberg, didn't have, I guess, I did really enjoy the story, and apparently so did the rest of the world because it got several like Academy nominations that year. Coming in at number 9 is Athlete A. This is a Netflix documentary on the gymnasts who survived the abuse of the US gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar, and it was actually released in 2020, so not too long ago. I knew next to nothing about this story and this investigation before watching this. I mean, I kind of knew like the gist of it, but I didn't know many of the details. Rape is one of my biggest fears, which caused a lot of tension when I was watching this movie. I think the main reason that this documentary was so well done was because of how many sources Netflix used to tell the story. This can be dangerous because it's easy for the audience to get lost in trying to keep up with who is who in relation to the story, but the way that Netflix did it, I never felt that once. I always was like, oh, this is the gymnast, or this was the parent of that gymnast, or this was a colleague. But each perspective was intentionally placed into the timeline to create this beautiful tribute to the survivors, as well as to promote awareness of rape within the sports world. And not only were there plenty of sources to carry the documentary, but there were also a variety of sources to hear from. Coming in at number 8, I feel like I keep saying coming in. At number 8, we have The Highwayman, which is also a movie done by Netflix. This story is based off of the true story of the 2 former Texas Rangers who hunted and killed Bonnie and Clyde. And the 2 Texas former Rangers are actually played by Kevin Costner and Woody Harrelson. And I don't think I could have picked a better duo to play these 2. They have such great on-screen chemistry, and I don't mean that like a love interest kind of way. I just mean like playing off of each other, not only like words, but body language and just like facial expressions. They just did a really good job, and I've noticed over the past couple of years I really enjoyed watching Kevin Costner. Like, I didn't really like him before 2019 or 2020, and then I just started watching a few more of his movies, and I'm like, I actually really enjoy watching him. He's very talented. I just am really late to the game on that. This movie is basically just cat and mouse. They find a lead, they follow it, and they barely miss capturing Bonnie and Clyde, and it's like that the entire movie, so it creates this tension with the audience that I think is really neat. It was also very interesting, and I've never really thought about this, how the world reacted to Bonnie and Clyde, especially Bonnie. Like, girls wanted to dress like her because they thought she was so cool. Do you think how crazy that is? Like, she was literally a psychopath murderer, and yet girls were like, I want to dress like her, and like they would see them on the street and they would go crazy. And then at the end, when they finally capture them and they're dead and they see them dead, they like freak out. Anyways, I really don't want to like go into the details of that, but I vividly remember that scene because I was just like, are they crazy? Anyways, You should really be careful about who you idolize. Just saying. Overall, this movie was really well done, but it is not for the faint of heart. I would definitely say if you're not a fan of blood and shooting, don't watch this movie. Moving on to number 7, we have Cruella. But let me just say 2 words. Emma Stone. There is not one role I've seen her play in that I have not enjoyed watching her do. This story tells the background story of one of Disney's most notorious villains. I really like this kind of like series that Disney is doing with telling the backgrounds of villains and giving them more of a human factor. Like a good example of that is Maleficent, and I would really love them to continue to do this. I think I would really love to see like the Queen of Hearts. I also just really love to see Cruella's relationships with other people that are in the original 101 Dalmatians movies, like Horace and Jasper, as well as Anita. Like, honestly, I like the storyline of how she used Anita to like market herself, I guess. I don't really promote herself. I don't know. That was just really cool. I think another thing that really drew me into this movie is the cinematography. I've noticed as I've gotten older and my eyesight has changed that I really like the more darker, moody aesthetics of movies rather than like the light ones. There's actually another movie that has a very similar cinematography that I'm going to talk about a little later. Number 6, we have Miracle. So I'm also beginning to see a little bit of a pattern with my movies. I have a lot of based on true story films in this list. Thus far, Miracle is the oldest movie on this list, having premiered in 2004. It really isn't that old, but premiered in 2004, only 24 years after the actual events in the movie occurred. Kurt Russell, who, again, amazing actor, plays, I think it's Herb Brooks, Herb is a spice or something. The former U.S. Olympics men's hockey team coach who coached the U.S.'s first victory against the Russians in the 1980s Olympics. This film holds a deeper meaning than most Americans realize. And yeah, it's like a Disney movie, so it's supposed to be super lighthearted, but there's kind of a lot of subtle themes that you have to put in the context of history. The Cold War, which was occurring during this time, was Russia versus the US. We tried to oust each other in science, in making weapons, and of course in sport. The Russians at this time were using extremely well-trained men, probably between the ages of 30 and 40 on their hockey team, as well as all their other teams, like as they should. That makes the most sense. But for some reason at the time, the US was still using college-aged boys on their hockey team. So imagine like massive Russian men and then like skinny little mini college boys. I'm sure hockey players aren't ever really skinny, but those boys on the 1980 hockey team like really understood the weight of representing their country that year, because they knew like of the Cold War between Russia. They knew like what was at stake if they were to lose. And to be honest, like because the Cold War wasn't an actual like face-to-face combat kind of war, they were the soldiers of the Cold War, whether other Americans realized that or not. Ooh, we're in the top 5 now. This is so exciting. Anyways, coming in at number 5, we have Hacksaw Ridge. I have been anticipating watching this movie since I was probably in junior high. Hacksaw Ridge is the true story of Desmond Doss, a 26-year-old from Lynchburg, Virginia, who enlisted in the army during World War II, like most people did. Doss wanted to serve his country, but due to past circumstances, he vowed to never touch or shoot a gun. The most impressive aspect of the story is the restraint and conviction Doss showed. He was actually bullied, thrown in jail, and almost killed by several Japanese soldiers. And yet, while having these convictions, he never once tried to push them onto others. In addition, I really enjoyed seeing Vince Vaughn portray a role that wasn't comedic. His character, Sergeant Howell, definitely probably had the most character development throughout the over 2-hour film. My absolute favorite scene from this entire movie was the quote-unquote praying scene. Towards the end of the movie, in this scene, Doss survives an entire night in enemy territory while saving injured soldiers from the battlefront. And every time he successfully saved a soldier, he prays, "Lord, help me get one more." All while this is occurring, there's a beautiful song called Praying by Rupert Gregson Williams, who did the score for this movie. and it's playing, and it's just like one of those moments, like it's just so cool to watch and unfold, and you have chills the entire time. And I don't know, I can't remember how many soldiers he saved, but it was definitely like over 40 probably, which is a lot, and he was trying to sneak past Japanese soldiers. Coming in at number 4 is Knives Out. Unlike Hacksaw Ridge, I did not want to watch this movie at all. Like, I was adamant about not watching it when it came out, and I don't know why, but I was shockingly surprised when I watched this movie. Clearly, it ended up in my top 5, so it really did, you know, impress me. And yet again, this is a film filled with a top-notch cast. Like, we have Chris Evans, Jamie Lee Curtis, Christopher Plummer, ugh, we love Christopher Plummer, Catherine Langford, and of course Daniel Craig. And I'm also really looking forward to seeing Ana de Armas. I thought that's how you'd say it. I'm really looking forward to seeing her in more films, and I actually looked up the second Knives Out, which is supposed to come out I think either this year or the next year, and she's not casted in it, which, okay, rightly so. They probably need a different story to make it interesting again. But the cast, oh, you should look up the cast. Like, it is going to be so good. Also, the second most impressive thing on this movie is the setting. The house that it is mainly filmed at is AKA called the Ames Mansion. We found in Boston, Massachusetts. One of my favorite places now, just so you know. And if the film never moved from this filming location, I still think it would have been an excellent movie, and I don't really think you needed anything else. My type A personality is really drawn to these, like, follow the lead, try to find who the murderer is. I mean, I know that's pretty normal for your mystery movie, but like, it's just really sad. The only weak spot of this entire film was the fact that from the very beginning I had guessed who the killer was, and it happened to be that I was right. While it took a lot of twisting and turning to get to realize that was who the murderer was, I was like pretty confident I knew who it was. Coming in for my top 3, starting with number 3, we have The Dig. This is yet another film based off of historical events. Netflix has really been just going ham on the movies lately. The story follows a widow, played by Carey Mulligan. The widow lives in a very beautiful home, Suffolk, England, with some very interesting mounds on her property. She hires a self-taught archaeologist, played by none other than Lord Voldemort himself, Ralph Fiennes, to dig and to discover what piece of history lies under the mounds. Not only do we have 2 wonderful actors playing the main characters in this movie, there are 3 other side characters played by wonderful actors: Johnny Flynn, Lily James, and James Dryden. Like I said before, this film features beautiful scenery, including the home of Edith Pretty, who is the main character, as well as the fields behind the home. Aside from the main arc of trying to discover what's in the mounds, there are several other relatable side stories that include illness and struggling marriages, and it's a wonderful story of history, about history, but in my opinion, much cooler than Indiana Jones. At number 2, I have Dead Poets Society. I remember scrolling through Instagram, like the Discover pages, and a lot of my Discover pages was filled with like movie scenes, and the scene that's like, "Oh Captain, my Captain," popped up, and that intrigued me and made me really want to watch this film and see why a ton of teenage boys were standing on top of their desks quoting poetry. Robin Williams plays an endearing high school English teacher who uses, quote, unorthodox methods to reach out to his students who face enormous pressures from their parents and the school, end quote. That source is from Google. I really don't know much else about it. There are just so many iconic scenes that I could talk about and go into great detail. A few of them include the Carpe Diem scene, the "Oh Captain, my Captain" scene, of course, as well as the cave scenes, etc. It really just made me think about the teachers and now professors that made an impact on my life, not just because they were good at being a teacher, but who really invested in my life and pushed me beyond my limit. There is one thing about this movie that really hits hard in a negative way, and warning, this topic is very heavy. It can be very sensitive to a lot of people, and that is suicide. In the movie, John Keating, after one of his students commits suicide, is fired. I'm on the side that I do not think Keating should have been, and I know this is not a real story, but I know this probably does happen in real life. He was fired but I don't think he should have been blamed for suicide. He was blamed for pushing this kid over the edge, and that was just not the situation at all, and it really just bothered me that he ended up getting fired. He wanted Perry to experience life and do things that he was passionate about. That was like the only part of the movie that I didn't like. And anyways, I do think it's a really great movie. Overall, there's a lot of life lessons to be learned from there, and I will definitely probably be rewatching it this year because I love it. I loved it so much. Before I move on to number 1, I would like to make some honorable mentions. I always do this, kind of like 11 and 12, but I'm not really putting a number to it, and that is Big Hero 6 and The Truman Show, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Moving on to number 1, drumroll. Inception. This movie is absolutely phenomenal. The genius of Christopher Nolan to be able to create a story so complex. Dreams are already so complex, and we honestly don't know a lot about them and what makes a dream, or what makes us dream the things we do dream. So let's go ahead and add on top of that by economizing them. After watching this movie a few months later, I listened to a 2.5-hour podcast on this movie and was more looking at it from like a film critic point of view. But listening to these guys who've probably seen it way more than I have like talk about it, honestly by the end of it I was still like so lost and like struggling to understand it. But I will put a link to it in the description to that podcast so you can check it out if you really want to. First of all, not only is the plot incredible and perfect, but the characters and of course the cast that plays them also make this film just like 10 times more lovable. First of all, we have the thief who just wants to get back to his family, the point man who just wants to do the sensible thing, the architect who just thought she was going to do college, and the forger who's definitely the comic relief of this movie. What's interesting about this movie is the antagonist. Protagonist is actually the antagonist, yet not at the same time. Bad guy at the beginning of the movie becomes the accomplice by the middle of the movie, and the guy whose dream that they are trying to plant an idea in, you just kind of end up feeling bad for him at the end of the movie, and you're like, why did they have to, you know, try and split up his business? Anyways, that makes no sense to in my mind, so I don't really know why that would make sense to anyone else. The only thing I wish this movie would have expounded upon was the relationship between Arthur and Ariadne. I know, it's not a romance movie, I know that. But as a girl, it would just be really nice, you know? And what we got was just, it was just not enough. Again, I know this movie is not about that at all, and I get that. And all that to say, it's a really wonderful movie. If you haven't seen it, you need to. And I actually watched this movie twice this year, and I still don't get it. So, and it was even better the second time. It still pulled me in, still made me want to follow the story more. No, not follow the story more necessarily, but like dive into it more, look at the theories that everyone has. Why did I move my head so much? Anyways, that is all I have for today's chapter of my life. Thank you for following along with my life.